Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. You are watching or maybe listening to the DMZ America podcast with me, Ted Rall, coming to you from the left.
And me, editorial cartoonist Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right.
I forgot to mention I'm an editorial cartoonist. I guess that's
Ted,
how little a part of my life it's becoming.
Nobody cares. I just heard again, they did a thing on Steve Bannon on NPR this morning, and it piggybacked on a story about some other right-wing podcaster. These guys podcast between 4 and 7 hours a day. Have you heard of this?
I read something like that too.
Yeah, some guy, he's like, I guess he's a right-wing influencer or whatever the fuck you call it. Some call it douchebaggery, but others would call it podcasting. And he does this,
culture, I say buzzard.
Yeah, like women are all, skanks, and why don't they love me? And someone needs to point out the fact that you're an asshole, but that's an incel kind of thing.
They don't love you because you think they're skanks.
Yes, who wouldn't like that?
You don't love me. If you think I'm a skank, I might not love you.
But it just struck me, is that the new model going forward? Should you and I be doing this for 6 to 10 hours a day? And it really is like him, like he's like paying bills or something. He's just cruising the internet. He's he's playing video games, but he also spews about, again, skanky broads and how they don't like incels. And so I don't know, man. And like I said, Bannon does it for 4 hours minimum a day.
Now, I've never watched Bannon's show, so I don't know what the format is like. Rush used to do 3 hours. He had very few commercials, as I recall.
He had a lot of commercials.
Maybe he did. Yeah. Well, that helps.
Well, what was his name? Libertarian talk host, roughly the same time. No, it was out of Atlanta, and he did 4 hours. I mean, there are people who do, and now because they've fired just about everybody, local talk radio. There's one, Ted, I think I talked to you about it. I can't remember where it was. Damn it. But it was two guys. One guy did the 4 to 5 show. The other guy did the 5 to 6 show. They both did the 6 to 8 show. And then one of the guys would do the 9 to 10 show, and the other guy would do the 11 to 1 show. I mean, it's
at times like this that I recall that assisted suicide is legal in Switzerland. There are direct flights to Zurich and Geneva from JFK.
I got to tell you, I mean, you and I were talking about something like this the other night, and I don't want to do anything I enjoy for 4 to 7 hours. I really don't. I don't know how.
Yeah, like I love movies. I don't want to watch a 7-hour movie. Sex. I don't want to have sex for 7 hours.
Even if I could, I wouldn't.
I don't want to eat like a steak au poivre for 4 hours. These are all of my favorite things.
And so 7 hours of like a day. And the guy's incredibly popular. I mean, he gets huge numbers. It has huge number of followers, millions.
Well, Rogan doesn't do that, right? He has a normal show. I guess Is it daily, I guess?
I'm assuming so. I only see the reels, actually. I have never watched his show.
Me neither have I. Obviously, we're probably remiss in our duty, since we probably should check out one of the most popular podcasters to see what he's doing and see what we can rip off.
Well, I started watching the one with Mel Gibson, and I had to turn it off, Ted, because the bullshittery got so high. Mel Gibson was talking about the election of Pope John Paul II. And he's going,
Mel had to say, but go.
Oh yeah. Let me try. Here's my best Mel Gibson imitation. So they had the smoke come out, and originally it was white, which means we have a pope. And then 20 minutes later, it came out black. Now, what's that all about? I'm thinking, well, some idiot put the wrong stack of shit in the oven is what that's about. I mean, no, but it just, and then he just starts going into this conspiracy bullshittery that just makes you roll your eyes. Now, and it was on the Rogan show. So I'm like, okay. And Rogan's like an anti-vaxxer. So that kind of, means he's lost 30 IQ points in my mind to begin with. He's a big UCFS guy with guys who effectively in a cage, bare knuckle fighting. If you've ever watched it, it's brutal. And I used to be a big boxing fan. I'm not as much anymore, but when I was much younger, so I mean, yeah. So they're going. That's the incel. What's masculinity? Well, masculinity is clearly rooting for two men, poor guys usually stupid, beating the living daylights out of each
with every hit.
Yeah. I mean, so there you go. That's so I have not listened to that podcast. There are other podcasts I have listened to, which were not quite as what's the word I'm looking for? Stupid. And the Bannon thing is just like, he's one of these guys that politics seems to attract. He has genius moments and interspersed with like absolutely idiotic moments. I mean, it's like, how do you put on your clothes? I mean, you would expect to see him wearing his underwear on the outside of his pants,
Is that wrong?
Well, in most cultures, I can't speak for the part of Manhattan you live in, but for the rest of us, yeah. Right. Anyway, so what we really want to talk about, Ted, by the way, wrote an excellent article. I'm going to praise him and then hand it off to him. But this week marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. Ted and I are of a certain age, and we both witnessed it as young men. And I can tell you, as someone who worked on the Nixon campaigns, who would eventually end up working on the Ford campaign in 76, watching this was devastating. It had never happened in American history. Now, Korea, you could say, was a draw. Would that be a fair thing to say?
I think that's fair to say. Yeah. I mean, look, it certainly wasn't a win for either side. So yeah, it's a draw.
Okay. So, but Vietnam, and they could spin it as much as they wanted to. Vietnam was a loss. The United States lost a war they waged. Now, it was not a declared war, which made it, I think, illegal in any reasonable sense, given that we were dropping hundreds of thousands of troops into another country, which I don't know, Ted, am I wrong? That seems to me to be all war.
I think over 600,000 people ultimately rotated in and out of Vietnam between 1964 and 1973 when the U.S. troop withdrawal took place. And we lost 58,000 men total, 48,000 of whom died in combat. And the other
10,000 died of like disease,
mostly car accidents.
Seriously?
Yeah,
wow.
a lot of car accidents. I mean, and that sounds strange and like they're a bunch of doofuses, but you got to imagine that the state of those roads was pretty poor. And especially, they have mudslides. It rains a lot. It's the jungle. I mean, it wasn't like the Vietnam that is there today with lots of paved highways and stuff.
So, that being said, I mean, it set up the dominoes in the opposite direction. And Ted, your mom, who said many sage things when she was watching that, you mentioned this in the lead of your column. What did she tell our viewers and our listeners?
She said, America's never going to recover from this, and America will never learn from this. And she was right about most things. I mean, she had amazing, like I remember her telling me when I was around the same age, I was 12, hey, your generation, which didn't have a name at the time, which became Generation X, is always going to have trouble finding work and getting ahead in life because demographically you're a smaller generation coming after all the baby boomers, and they're going to take up all the jobs and all the energy and all the attention, and you guys are always going to have a hard time. And I was like, she just said that just because she knew about demographics. So she was very smart, and she was right. Obviously, she was French, so being French, it's obvious that you have some kind of insight into the Indo-Chinese experience. The French were there from 1945 to before 1945. But in 1954, they were forced to withdraw. They lost. The French met with their American counterparts when, under Eisenhower, the earliest American advisors were starting to go in and help out the South Vietnamese. And the French said, you guys really don't want to do this. It's like, we know, you don't do colonialism. France, we do colonialism, and we got our asses kicked. And we knew this place. We've been there for a long time. Like we speak the language, and they kicked our ass fair and square, and they're going to kick your ass too. We didn't listen. And, then by 1973, of course, we negotiated a peace deal in Paris. Henry Kissinger came home with his Nobel Peace Prize. The U.S. troops withdrew. And, one thing, Scott, that I always thought was a little peculiar, like you, I was shocked by the images of them, the chaos, the mayhem of all the Americans and their South Vietnamese allies fleeing, climbing up, hanging from the bottom of helicopters as they were leaving the roof of U.S. embassy buildings or in surrounding buildings in Saigon, pushing Huey helicopters, now worth over $1 million each, over the edge of the aircraft carriers to make more room so more planes could land. The burning millions of dollars in cash on the roof of the embassy so it wouldn't fall into the hands of the communists, and all of this stuff. And, the mayhem, the chaos. And this was an America that had just gone through the Watergate scandal, the Nixon resignation. We knew the war was lost. All that said, looking back, we were kind of dumb not to think that Saigon would fall. After all, we did withdraw all of our troops 2 years before. And if anything, it kind of took a long time for the North Vietnamese to get it together and close the deal and capture Saigon. It's kind of like, it's almost like when the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in the late 1980s. I believe it was 1987 when Gorbachev's withdrawal went through. It wasn't until 1996 that the Taliban came to power in 1990, and the puppet regime that the Soviets put in under a guy named Najibullah lasted 5 years until 1992. So the insurgency kind of waited to make sure they were ready to absorb.
And I think that's what happened with the North Vietnamese. They wanted to make sure we were GONE, and they knew, which came as a shock again. And I also want to bring this into a historical context as well. And you did that from the beginning with the French involvement in Indochina. But watching, the withdrawal, knowing that this was going to happen, and we didn't learn anything from it. Your mom could not have been more right. That, because, what was it? Well, 45 years later, the fall of Afghanistan, when we left, the exact same scenes were taking place. We left our allies and the people who worked with us, who had the courage, some level of courage to work with us, and they were left behind. God knows what happened to them. I just, as someone who was raw American, red, white, and blue, to watch these images, let me ask you a couple of historic questions. Eisenhower sends advisors, and he does then he gives the military-industrial complex speech. You have to wonder, if Eisenhower had stayed another term, would this have happened? And that's a real stretch, because he had already served 2 terms. The second question, though, is, and this is one that, boy, I don't know how to answer. Maybe you do. If JFK goes to Dallas and doesn't get himself shot, does he stop the war? He made utterances of how stupid it was, how he felt trapped, but would he have done what he should have done? He could have done 2 things, which was his policy before he died, which was, I'm just going to maintain these troop levels, which was about 1,500?
Yeah. If that, like 800.
Yeah, it was not a lot, and just keep it at that. But the pressure, the political pressure for America not to lose, this domino, this country to the communists, as the dirty red Chinese were coming down, which of course had nothing to do with the Vietnamese, as we learned after we left, and the Chinese tried to come in, and the Vietnamese also kicked their ass. If JFK had survived, if he had lived, would the war have taken the same turn it did under LBJ?
By the way, another ass kicking that the Vietnamese army doesn't get enough credit for is they put an end to the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields in Cambodia, right?
Yeah.
They took out the trash there, right, when it really needed to be taken out. I don't know the alternative history. I'm always a little skeptical. Oliver Stone in his movie JFK, his thesis was primarily that he was offed by the members of the military industrial complex because JFK was going to see reason and at least not escalate and maybe even withdraw completely from Vietnam. I'm skeptical. Eisenhower gave that speech on the way out the door after 8 years of expanding the military industrial complex. And also LBJ, thought it was a stupid war too. He's the one who expanded it the most. And basically he, as you know, would be up late crying and drinking and just sick to his heart, to his soul about like what was going on, to, mainly all the lost American lives. And, I don't know to what extent he gave much thought to the Vietnamese, but he was very upset about it. And he just felt like there was no way out. The pressure was kind of like, we're America. We don't lose wars. If we lose this war, who knows what will happen? We will look awful. We will look weak. And of course, obviously, he had the big bad Soviet bear to worry about, to think about, like, in superpower politics, a defeat like that could really be a mortal wound. And certainly the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan, I would not go so far as to say as it was the only cause of the Soviet collapse, but it was probably a major contributing factor morally and politically and economically.
Was it a psychological hit against the Soviet Union as well?
I think it was. And, also certainly their international reputation, being able to say, like, look, if we're your ally, you can count on us. Well, remember why the Soviets were there, right? They were there to prop up their little puppet dictatorship that they had installed. They had installed a socialist regime in the 70s, and the CIA-backed coup overthrew it. So they were like, okay, we're there to defend it. And then it's like, well, it's hard, so we're out. It's not a good look for a country that is supposed to be leading the international revolutionary forces of all the communist parties in the world through the Comintern. So it definitely made them look bad. So I can see why LBJ was, why he was concerned and why he didn't want to withdraw. But I think we can all look back now and say, very plainly, the Pentagon Papers showed that as early as 1964, 1965, American policy planners knew this was a no-win situation. And so they just kept going in deeper and deeper. And look, LBJ was right, because here we are 50 years later. And like, what are the consequences? I mean, first of all, we can plainly see the war was unnecessary, because if we just wanted to do business in Vietnam, well, we do business in Vietnam, right?
Lots of it. Yeah.
We lost. It's a major trading partner, even though it's a communist country. We have hundreds of thousands. Before COVID, 1 million American tourists a year visited Vietnam. Now it's back up to about like 500, 600,000. But the point is, we do a lot. We have very friendly relations now. So we didn't need to fight that war. We could have just been friends, let them have self-determination, let the North and South duke it out, figure it out. But I guess the real question now is, what was the lesson, and what were the effects of it? I mean, the effects of it were devastating. I mean, there were major economic losses. The war cost over $1 trillion in money adjusted for today. There was interest on that money. American corporations lost hotels, casinos, property, or natural. By the way, it turns out, and they were just starting to figure this out, that South Vietnam had shit tons of natural gas. We lost all access to those rights. It was a bloodbath financially, and we looked bad. The fighting the war made us look evil and oppressive and hypocritical, because we're telling the rest of the world that colonialism is bad and that the Soviet Union is bad for influencing other countries. But here we are doing the same thing. And then losing did make us look weak. A bunch of guys in black pajamas who live in mud holes kicked our ass.
Well, Ted, if I can jump in and just say we were weak. I mean, Before I go on to the rest of our record, I know, Ted, you're not a sports fan, but way back in the day, I used to do a satirical magazine in San Pedro, California, called The Pacific Avenue, and they had a redevelopment project, and they had a hole that stayed a hole for literally 2 decades. And me and my editor decided we challenged the people in charge of it to what we called the Hole Bowl, and but we talked about sports. One of our sports headlines was that Nebraska football team at the time was 9-0, would take on the U.S. Army, which was 7-1-1. And I literally it's one of the few reactions we ever got directly to this thing, because we pretty much just Xeroxed it and left it around town. It was very punk rock. You would have loved it. Yeah, but we got a direct comment saying, what's this one? Why 7-1-1? When did we ever lose? We go, well, dude, I'm sorry you fought in it, but we did lose. Vietnam was a loss. That's that went in the L column. Korea, like I said, was
no question it was a loss. And it's interesting. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I wanted to talk about the post. I wrote about this in the column a little bit about the post Vietnam mythology, right? Like that sort of erupted after the war. And I thought it was really interesting that we've never really, through popular culture or politics, really had clarity about this war, really. And I mean, I guess maybe we never have clarity about any war, but this one in particular, because I remember the war very well. I remember it well enough. You're older than me by a few years, but I remember, for example, kids up, I knew a guy up the street. He was in high school, turns 18. Hey, where's Rob? Oh, yeah. And then I saw Rob's photo, wanted at the post office, wanted for draft evasion. And he had like dipped and gone to Canada. And so, I mean, and I remember talking to my mom and saying, Mom, am I going to have to go to fight in Vietnam? And she said, well, it's been going on since the 1950s. So yeah, probably. And I'm like, what? Now, years later, she always denied that she ever said that. I would have taken you to Canada for sure. Yeah, Mom, you would say that. That's not what you said at the time. But anyway.
And if I can jump in real quick and just say, I'm the youngest of 4 boys. My oldest brother was of age and was in the draft and had when they had the lottery, and he happily got a low number. But before he got a low number, Ted, I can remember my mother and her sister screaming at my father, who was also screaming, which was not uncommon in my house. But what was uncommon was what they were screaming about was my mother and my aunt wanted to send my brother to Canada, that this was a dumbass war. And I mean, that's always been my litmus test for every other military intervention. Would you take your child and sacrifice them for this cause? And some of them are yes. A vast majority, given that litmus test, is no. I think the psychological effect now, America is 7-1-3. I mean, we've lost Afghanistan. We lost Iraq. You could say, was Lebanon, would you consider that? Would you put that in the loss column, or was that was that a preseason game?
I think it's a preseason game. I don't think it counts as a full-fledged, game.
So 7-1-3 still gets you in the playoffs, but you're low seeded, and you're going to have to play the winners of the China versus Russia game.
Now, to give the militarists their due, maybe we have to give them the Gulf War and Panama.
Oh yeah, the first Gulf War. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so that's Grenada, because that's like beating a minor league team.
Yeah, I can't put that in
Cuban construction workers.
Panama, the invasion of Panama to get Noriega. But when we actually have large scale military actions in the last, since the end of the Vietnam War, we lose them. And psychologically, I think people are really going to get pissed when they hear this, Ted, because nobody likes to hear you're a loser. But we haven't won a serious military engagement since 1945.
That's true. We lose our wars, and I don't know why we keep wanting to do them, because we're not good at it. I do know why we do it, because winning's not the point. Blowing things up and buying new things to blow up, that's the point. This is about business.
Right. And when the production of that thing that blows up spans 20 congressional districts, then it's really good for the country.
Totally good for the country. So
totally good. Not so good. Okay. If you haven't heard me say this before or followed me on Center Clip or watched my cartoons, I've really become anti-war. I was uh, conned into supporting the Iraq War. And that was a massive mistake for which I still feel terrible about. And I just feel stupid for falling for that. Because for the most part, I was anti-war prior to that. Since then, I am adamantly and passionately anti-war. Wars are dumb. Nothing good ever came from them except the two parties eventually sit down, which they should have fucking done in the first place.
True.
Ukraine being, exhibit A today.
True.
Should they, like Ukraine, we all know how this is going to end. I mean, Trump and some of his people are getting so much shit for saying cede Crimea, cede the Donbass, and because it's over. And how many people are saying, you can't do that. You can't do that. It's done. It's over.
It's reality.
It's how do you say, fait complete? I'm saying that wrong.
Fait accompli, yeah.
Merci. It's over, and you can do like in Vietnam, or you can just keep killing people for another decade. You can keep sending young Ukrainian and Russian boys into the meat grinder. And at the end of 10 years, it's going to be the same fucking result. So how do you get out of it? I mean, there are some negotiating tools or some negotiation to be done, but for the most part, this one's done. And I don't like it. I'm not a Putin fan. I don't root for Russia. I never have. I don't understand anyone who does, but except maybe, Russians.
Hey, be careful.
Except maybe Russians. You know what I'm saying, Ted. I mean, I'm not, but this was.
I think Russia deserves a lot of props. I like Russia, especially because they defeated Nazism. So there's that.
Well, if you look at the history of World War II, I mean, obviously they paid the ultimate price. How many dead?
And they did the work. Yeah. 28 million.
Yeah. Stalin, who was a real bastard, let's be clear,
True.
begged and begged and begged for an opening of a Western front to take some of the pressure off of him and his troops. But the sacrifices that Russia and the Russian people and the Russian army had to make were astounding. And they saved, weirdly, the world from fascism.
True.
I say weirdly just because the system that Stalin had put in place was pretty fascist.
It was definitely authoritarian, to say, or it was a dictatorship for sure. They were both dictators. Obviously.
So America. So I think you can now say, and let's make the leap, Ted. And this is really, people are really going to lose their shit over this one. The American experiment is over. The American empire is done. It is in collapse. It is in contraction. Everything that Trump is doing is exactly what every other empire that has gone into contraction has done. And what other empires am I talking about? All of them. Spain, same thing. England, same thing. Holland, same thing. France, to a lesser degree, same thing. They expanded. They had a century and a half of woohoo, and then it was over.
They overexpanded, and then they got. Now the difference here is, and this is my argument, the Dutch, they fought at the end of World War II. They emerged from occupation, and as soon as they achieved liberation from the Germans, they decided to go to war to keep their Indonesian colony from getting liberation from them. So they fought the Indonesians for 4 years, from 45 to 49, got their asses kicked, kind of like in a prequel to Vietnam. And the French did they had a similar defeat in 1962 after a bloody 8-year battle against Algerian independence forces. The other colonial powers, the Belgians, same thing happened. And anyway, in the UK, of course, I would say most notably, the British withdrawal from Africa was slower, and they kind of ended up soft pedaling things with like the Commonwealth. Yeah, they lost the India in like 1947. But interestingly, with the England, not so much, but most Western former colonial powers in Europe, they ended up mostly redirecting their resources internally and not spending money to maintain these distant empires. And it turned out to be good for them and for their people. France would never have built the TGV high-speed rail if they'd kept up the Algeria type shit. And if they hadn't gotten out of their African colonies, I mean, yeah, they have, they still have ties there, and they still, they have dirty deals, but it's not the same level as it was, in the 1950s and 40s. All these countries, they learned from getting they got defeated. They turned that defeat into an opportunity. The United States got defeated in 1975. We never learned our lesson. We never got rid of the cult of militarism. We never stopped, and we never redirected our resources inward. To the contrary, there are fewer resources being directed inward now than there were in 1975.
I would argue that the UK fought tooth and tongue, especially under Churchill, to fight against breaking up the empire. They felt that was their manifest destiny, and they weren't going to let go of these things. And eventually they had to. And yeah, you're right. So you can turn those resources internally and have things like, school systems that do crazy, crazy shit, Ted. Like they teach their students how to read and write to an extent that they actually support going to college. And the thing is, these countries didn't disappear. I look at the Dutch as probably the closest example to the United States empire, in that they controlled, their empire was financial. They had all of these branches. Now, roughly at the peak of American industrialization, the United States controlled 36% of the capital on the planet. That had never happened in the history of our species, Ted, including the Roman Empire, including the Mongol Empire, any of them. We're incredibly crazy wealthy, and we are not anymore. The wealth has disappeared. The manufacturing has disappeared. That doesn't mean America, balkanizes and we'll have the Confederate States will come back again, boy. And the New England states, which were the first to try to secede, by the way. People forget this. Could you imagine New England as an independent country?
You can't trust those Rhode Islanders. Shifty.
Hey, yeah, nice weather for ducks. You wouldn't understand them. You could, as an Ohioan in Central and Middle America, you would have walked up to them. Hey, yeah, we da da da, yeah. It would have been like talking to someone in Middle English. You just would have had, anyway. All of that being said, this is the end. We're done. We're done. The Chinese are doing things better, faster, smarter. We now have a complete and utter developmentally disabled president and his administration. They don't, they're stumbling, bumbling, fumbling. They really think that tariffs can work, which makes me giggle if it wasn't so fucking stupid. The Chinese are doing things, Ted, like, and you've pointed this out several times, building ports in Africa and in Central and South America, freeways, high-speed train. And they go there and they do it in the Don Corleone type of way. They say, sometime I may need your services, and that day may never come. They're just doing it because they're friends, but it's brilliant. It's just the goodwill towards China in the next 25 years is going to exceed the United States by a factor of 100. Because the only thing that happens is if Americans show up, we're there to shoot brown people. That seems to be pretty much it. We're not there to help anymore. When they shut down USAID is problematic. USAID had scandals, big ones. Well, that's one of those, you clean house. You don't get rid of it. But so the images of USAID on bags of rice that are flown to places that have been hit by a tsunami, those pictures are gone. It's going to be the Chinese flag. Ted, here's the thing. Okay. Here's the thing that hits me right between the eyes, because in the next 4 to 6 years, the Chinese flag is going to be put on the surface of the moon by Chinese astronauts. And America's going to sit there and we're going to continue to, give money to Elon Musk for his big fucking rockets that keep blowing up. Oh, I'm sorry. Unscheduled disassembly, which is a phrase they actually use. The Chinese, we're entering the Chinese century, and it's their world. The idea of democracy, of liberal democracy, as you and I have come to know it, will be extant in some corners of the world, but it will not be the dominant political and governmental structure going forward. That's what this means, and that's what this looks like. Have I said anything you disagree with?
No, I don't. You have not, and I don't. I mean, I guess I'm curious about how and why we did not learn the lesson of Vietnam. I mean, I'm confused. I mean, first of all, we made it all about us, right? I mean, we went over there. I mean, when you talk to Vietnam vets, you and I both know them. They all kind of said, like, okay, even if I was in favor of this, I get on this plane and I fly like 25 hours. I'm on the other side of the planet. I get off the plane. Nothing looks like America, right? There ain't no dogs, no birds, no nothing that looks like home. And you're like, why the fuck am I here? Like, why? Why are we here? And like, nobody could really tell them. That was a major part of the confusion. But the point is, we sent these young men over there. They all came back and we all said it. We gave them permission. And rather than say that, the big question is, why did we go and bug people in their own home who don't mean us any harm whatsoever? We don't ask that question. Why did we kill them? We don't ask that question. We're like, wow, us killing them, man, I felt really bad about killing that baby. Man, I feel really guilty. I'm crying. I think about the people I killed. I'm sad. It's like, it's all, and like, there is a place for pity and worry and concern for the people, the young people that from West Virginia that we sent out to this shit to the other side of the world to get like shot at by the locals and, you know, eaten by and bitten by poisonous snakes, which are crazy common in Vietnam. But like, still, I mean, the big picture is missing here, right? I mean, if you just look at the movies, Deer Hunter, I feel sad, you know, like, you know, Apocalypse Now. Wow, that was weird. Very psychedelic. It's like, you know, Hamburger Hill. They're shooting us. That hurts. It's like Rambo. Like,
well, that's the point. That's the point. And the one of all the movies you're going to mention, including Platoon, of all those movies, they were successful and sure, Academy Award winning and all that stuff. But the movie that became a fucking franchise in the United States was Rambo. And he's in jail. He says, we're not going to refight. You know, they send him back to Vietnam. Remember Rambo 2 to get the MIAs out. He says, we're going to send you in. He goes, do we get to win this time? As if, like, you know, it was bureaucrats that fucked it up for them.
Yeah, basically that's the myth, right? Is that they could have won if their hands had been untied. Well, that's true. We could have dropped nuclear weapons on Hanoi. That would have worked. You know, we weren't willing to do that.
Would it have?
But also it's like, but no one even asks, like, okay, you could have won. Sure. But the tragedy of Vietnam isn't that we lost. The fact that we lost, that's the right outcome. We're supposed to lose. We were the bad guys. We went and fucked with innocent people in their homes, and they defeated us. That's the way that's supposed to work.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Ted, and say I disagree to a point, because I think Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam, very similar, especially we ran in saying we're going to give you democracy to countries that weren't asking for it. Now, the American mindset is that, well, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want democracy? Well, let's go with someone who is, oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? Starving, or, you know, you don't have, or uneducated. You begin with that. Afghanistan, flying into Afghanistan, demanding that we install, you know, democratic institutions. There was no history there, and there was no.
Not really. We put our thumb on the scale about the Afghans were going to elect the former deposed king, and the Americans didn't like him, so they're like, yeah, no. And the Taliban were the most popular political party. We're not going to let them be running the election.
Well,
so
precisely.
Democracy, as long as we like the results.
Yes, precisely. But that's what I meant by, and there wasn't like, oh my God, we have this groundswell of democracy. They didn't. It didn't exist. True. The same was true in Iraq. The same is true in most.
I was there. I was there when Afghanistan, the Taliban left. I was there in Kabul. No one was talking about like, man, what we really need is elections. People were like, man, what we really need is food.
Yeah, and
What we
roads.
really need is clean water, and we would love some paved roads. And man, hey, maybe phones. Could we have those? Those would be awesome.
But going into a situation, Vietnam, perfect example. Afghanistan, perfect example. Iraq, a glaring example of how we stumble in thinking if we bomb the living fuck out of you and you become complacent, we can then impose on you a form of government you didn't ask for and don't know much about. Iraq, and I'm one of them, Ted. You probably knew because of your travels in the region. I had no idea at the time there were 3 very distinct forms of Islam and very distinct cultures around those, the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds.
The Sunni and the Shia, yeah.
Isn't that what I said?
Yeah. You kind of broke up.
The Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds. So 3 very distinct people. All 3 hate each other passionately. But by gum, because this was a country put together by British colonialists, surely they can hang together and put on their coats, their common coats on the hooks of democracy.
Well, don't forget, the British didn't draw those. The British were a lot of things, but they did this on purpose. Their approach when they created new countries was to try to divide ethnic groups among and split them up across borders. For example, the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, they split up the Pashtun people between the 2 of them so that they wouldn't become, a threat to the English. Divide and conquer. Stalin did the same thing in Central Asia. The Uzbeks and the Tajiks are separated. Uzbekistan's only 60% Uzbek. It's 40% Tajik.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Tajikistan's is only 60% Tajik, 40% Uzbek. That's on purpose. And the Brits did the same thing in places like that. And they in Iraq, they didn't want the Sunnis or anyone to get it together and come after them. So so it's kind of like you're looking at Saddam Hussein, who was Sunni. He held the country together by force and brutality. And in a way, there's no other way to hold a country like that together. So that's how you do it. It's not like democracy would have worked. So
what happens? So what does this look like?
He knew what he was doing.
Walk with me down the road to the end of the end of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
We never get our shit back together. Clearly, we lose a couple more wars. We are now, I think,
our economy never recovered. It's interesting that up until the end of the Vietnam War, if we had the minimum wage where it was at the end of the Vietnam War, adjusted for official inflation, not the real inflation rate, it would now be about $30 an hour. So obviously, but up until that point, the minimum wage had been increasing at a nice clip. Up until that point, there were always new anti-poverty programs, even under Richard Nixon. That all comes to an end at the end of the Vietnam War. We go into austerity mode. No more anti-poverty programs, no more public housing projects, no more increases in the minimum wage. We see the split between rich and poor that gap get wider and wider, and it's continuing to widen. I mean, the end of the Vietnam War is where we really lose our mojo. It's almost like we don't get to have nice things anymore because of what happened 50 years ago.
So now let's fast forward to today. We've had a series of inept, not great presidents. Let's be clear. I
think you would probably put Reagan in the pantheon of.
I'd say he was a good. I mean, yeah, he was a good, but he recognized. But he also recognized, I think, that where we were as a country and that building internal wealth was the way forward, and he wasn't wrong. But where we are today, and let's try to look forward, and that's not that hard to do. I think we're going to look at, again, I go to the Dutch as one example, and probably the clearest example. We're going to be much like, I'm thinking Rome under Augustus, where you had a Senate, you had elections. They continued to call themselves a republic, but they were anything but. Augustus actually had veto power over everything. And if he wanted something, he'd simply go to the Senate and say, okay, this is the law now. And they go, oh, okay. I suspect we're going to enter those types of waters, that our democracy is going to be nothing remotely resembling what we had even 5 years ago. And going forward, you're going to have a strong executive with extensive powers beyond anything the Constitution ever imagined, but they're going to cobble it to a constitutional context in a way that people with IQs above room temperature are going to go, what the fuck? But then we're not going to be listened to if we're in the country at all, if we're not at camp. Does that sound like a
no, that sounds, I mean, that's like the Hungarian model, right?
Yeah.
I think, some would say it's like the Russian model. I mean, it's basically democracy with, it's more like authoritarianism with a veneer of democracy, or in this case, representative democracy. I think that's right. I think that's the direction. If we're lucky, that's as bad as it'll get. It could be worse than that. I mean, Scott, I know we're talking about Vietnam, but I think it's worth, but we always go off the reservation anyway. Yeah. I want to take this is apropos. I think, the constitutional crisis is officially upon us. Last night, President Trump had an interview on ABC News where his reporter asked him, we're in the Oval Office. Your phone's right there. You could pick up that phone and call the president of El Salvador and get Mr. Arbego Garcia back. And he's like, yes, I could. And it's like, well, why don't you? And basically it's like, I don't want to. Now, the thing is, up until now, the president's lawyers in the DOJ have been playing cute with the courts and arguing in court that now that an El Salvadorian national is back in El Salvador, there's nothing they can do to get him back, that they would open the border to him if the Salvadorians, for some reason, decided to send him back. They've never admitted up until now that they just don't want him back. Now, we all know that was the case, but now the president is on the record on national television saying that. So he's basically saying, I'm overtly defying a federal court order.
Yeah.
It's already gone to the appellate division of the federal courts. So now it will be ruled upon by the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court tends to be deferential to presidential power, but I find it very hard to believe that they're going to let this go.
Well, and if you watched the rally, which lasted over an hour and a half, Ted, Trump's speech lasted an hour and a half. I mean, he's starting to head towards Castro-esque type speeches to celebrate the 100 days. And part of what he talked about was the dictatorship of the courts. And we have to overcome that. I mean,
not scary at all.
No, not at all. That there's no check on that power. And that's exactly where we're headed. And my suspicion is that will continue. And
so what will happen? I mean, so at this point, look, obviously the executive, we could all see this coming a million miles away. The two branches are, it's a game of chicken. They're running towards each other. Who's going to blink?
Well, the courts don't have enforcement mechanisms. They don't have an army. They don't have a police force. They don't have really any, when it gets up to the appellate or up to the Supreme Court, who enforces those laws? Who enforces those decisions? There's nothing, there's no,
that's right.
The implication was that, okay, this is our checks and balances. You decided this. Okay. We got that.
Up until now, presidents for the most part have just obeyed the courts because it was the right thing to do.
Richard Nixon, who was, castigated, was demonized for being against the Constitution. If I know this, when the Supreme Court finally ruled that he had to release the tapes, and yes, it took a while for it to get to the Supreme Court, but when it did, they ruled very quickly and unanimously, by the way, that he had to release the tapes. He did, and he knew at that point he had to resign because he's talking about breaking into the Watergate and covering it up. That where we are now is you're going to have an impotent judicial system. You already have an impotent legislative because they're not doing anything. Really, the only hope someone brought up, and I'm not sure this is going to happen, is the Democrats taking large numbers in the midterm elections. I'm not sure they can, because if you don't stand for anything, why the hell should I vote for you? But that's a podcast we've had. So going forward, I think the Trump people are very excited. I mean, it feels like it's been 100 years, not just 100 days. Yeah. They're going to continue to bash away at the institutions to increase executive power. Now, to the point where, assuming Trump is alive, I mean, he's a big fat fuck and, in terrible shape. He looks terrible.
I asked AI about that. AI thinks he can be 92.
Why does AI think this? Well, I mean,
because of his parents lived a long time, and he doesn't smoke or drink.
Right. I mean, so let's assume he's at the same level he is today, which is nothing to crow about. But let's just say that he is. He'll run for re-election, and there are ways that there are conservatives there are at think tanks now in a conservative law schools who are trying to figure out ways and workarounds on the 22nd Amendment. And I suspect they'll find them, and to a point, they'll find it enough, Ted, where they're going to do it. Now there's going to be people on the left losing their minds saying he can't do it. But let's say he goes through, enters the primary system. Nobody else enters it. He gets the Republican nomination. Mm-hmm. The fall campaign begins in earnest. They're still continuing these legal battles, sure. Winning some, losing some. You know how this goes. And then on election night, he gets the majority of the vote. Now,
well, I mean, don't forget, there will be some of the election challenges will be to have him removed from the ballot, as we saw in the last election. Remember the last election where they tried to remove him from the ballot on the grounds that he was a convicted felon. So they'll try to remove him from the ballot on the grounds that he can't run for a third term.
Well, they can try. They tried this last time and they couldn't do it. My suspicion is he will run unopposed on the Republican Party.
100%. Yeah, no question.
So, what's a law? Some Democrats saying you have to have opposition when there's no opposition? When no one's stepping up?
The Republican Party can do whatever they want. But the question is, legally they can do whatever they want. The question is, will the American people go along with it and vote for Trump in the fall? I guess it'll depend on what the economy looks like and all that. I suspect that they don't have the same reverence for tradition and constitutional norms that maybe people like you and me have.
None, absolutely none. And so you say, well, Scott, how can you say that the American empire is ending? Well, let's see. You get rid of due process. That becomes, up to the executive to decide who and how people get due process. Let's begin with that. And, you may say, I don't care if they're doing it to those nasty brown guys who are in gangs. So many of them.
They're doing it to 4-year-old U.S. citizens now.
Yeah, they know what they did, Ted.
Stage 4 cancer.
They know what they did.
Or they knew they were going to do if they hadn't died of, cancer.
Yeah, I mean, but when you see due process become a punchline that, these people, the MAGA people think, well, that's other people. Well, it's not other people forever. You and I both know how this goes. And it can go to, Ted Rall, passionately criticized the Trump administration. Ooh, Ted, we now have a law, and they have introduced laws in the Congress because you have a whole pack of completely and thoroughly retarded. I really do think they're developmentally disabled. I watched them during the State of the Union. They're just it was unbelievable. And they are trying to pass laws saying it is illegal to criticize the president of the United States. They're trying to pass that. You have a United States. There's Ted's book. Go check it out.
Yep.
You have a united, wow.
There
Woo! It is. Bum, bum, bum. You have a Congress that is, and you have a United States, you have a populace in the United States that thinks that the First Amendment should not apply to everyone, particularly the people who disagree with them. 60%, Ted. I mean, think about all this. That's where I'm coming from, where freedom of speech, where due process is now going to be eroded to the point where it's a joke. That's the end of empire. That's the end of a representative Republican democracy. That's the end. We're done. And it all began 50 years ago when we saw Saigon and those poor people trying to hold on to the helicopter as it took off from the top of the American embassy.
And it's fascinating, right? I mean, like watching all that, we just knew it was very strange and very disturbing. But I think no one could have predicted we were going to end up here 50 years later. That, you know, the aftermath. I mean, this could have gone any number of ways. We could have gone the Dutch way. We could have gone, you know, we did what we did. But I would have never predicted that that it was going to lead us kind of to autocracy. And that mythology, the Rambo thing, right? It helped bring about Trump, because if a country can't even admit that it loses, right, a war, then maybe it's not that big of a stretch for a president to not admit that he lost an election, or that he should.
Wow. You're right.
You know,
you are 1,000% right, Ted. So here we are. You know, going forward, we've talked about what it looks like. I'm pretty convinced I know what it looks like. Keep your head down, shut up. Which is that's a description of you and me. Absolutely. We will suffer in silence.
Always. And you can always tune in here to see us suffering in silence here on the DMZ America podcast. Quick pitch for my book here, which
put it up, man. There's the cover.
It comes out tomorrow, but you can pre-order right now on my website, rall.com. Never mind the Democrats. Here's what's left. Radical solutions for radical problems. You can also get it at any bookstore. It'll be on Amazon as of tomorrow, but you can go to any bookstore and just order it. You know, you can look up the ISBN number. Can you get
through Amazon? You
can. Yeah, it's the link goes up tomorrow when it goes live, and I will publicize that, of course. But if you want a signed copy, it's going to cost you $5 extra. But if you reach out to me, I'll mail you a signed copy. More if you live in Kanadistan or Mexico or other parts of the world.
Kanadistan?
Kanadistan or Canada.
Oh.
Although, if Trump has his way, there will be no extra mail. The postage to Canada will be the same. No difference whatsoever.
You know, he's talking about making it from British Columbia, onto the next. What's the state? What's the province next to Quebec? Because he doesn't want Quebec, apparently.
Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario. So he's going to make that one state. That means Texas that means like Alaska becomes the second biggest state. Have you seen the landmass he's talking?
Quebec?
He wants Ontario. He doesn't want Quebec. You know, those Frenchies.
51% of the entire Canadian economy.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm just saying, when they post maps on MAGA World, that they don't have Quebec. It stops at Quebec.
What about the maritime provinces?
I don't think they want that either, just because they're so poor.
No Newfoundland for them? No PEI?
No, which I think I'd love to go to. You've been to. You've said they're lovely.
Oh, it's absolutely. Yeah, if you really want to get away from it all, Trans-Labrador Highway. 1,000 miles of a road that doesn't have a single intersection.
That can't be right.
It is right. It is right. It's just one road. That's it.
Does it go through cities though? I mean, it's got. Where do you get gas? What?
There are no cities. No. Labrador doesn't have cities. It has little areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Places to get gas.
Yeah, you better not miss any of those chances to get gas. Otherwise, you will be getting close to the polar bears in some ways that you might not like.
Producer, what about Montana? Montana would not be the northernmost of the 48 contingent.
I'm popping Robbie in. What's that, Robbie?
Well, you're talking about how you can be shipping these books out. So for whatever from Montana, I mean, does Montana get any kind of special postage deals from Rall.com?
Oh, no. Montana's still technically part of the United States.
Is it? Really? I mean,
Despite
really?
its large, besides its large wolf and bear population.
One thing, how you're talking about earlier, about Trump running for a third term and stuff. A lot of the militias around here are actually gearing up in case he tries to do that, because they said they're Republican or Democrat. They're not going to support it.
Really? Well, that makes me feel.
I never thought I'd ever say this. Go militias.
Yeah, I never thought I would either. But yeah, okay.
Well, I mean,
well,
if you're a constitutionalist, I mean, if that's where you draw the line. That's where you draw the line, and that's why we have a Second Amendment. Let's be honest; it's not about hunting.
No, well, it's a kind of hunting.
Two-legged varmints.
Well, Montana. I'm getting the wrong. No, I've got the line wrong. Do you remember Dog Day Afternoon and Al Pacino and the guy he's committing the bank robbery with? He said they're demanding a helicopter and a plane to go. He says, "Okay, we can go anywhere in the world. Where do you want to go?" His friend, outside the country, and the guy he's doing the robbery with goes, "What about Wyoming?" Al Pacino goes, "Well,
close enough." I mean,
yeah, they're really not part of the United States. Let's be honest. By the way, Robbie has sent me pictures of where he lives. Holy crap! It is stunning. I mean, it's so beautiful.
Sooner rather than later, we're going to do a book signing out there.
Yeah, I'm actually working on getting on with the University of Montana. I'm on hold with them still.
And Scott, I should get something set up in Birmingham too. Anyway,
that'd be great. Oh, I know the exact bookstore that would love to.
This book does seem to be hitting a nerve, more so than my last one. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
If that happens, maybe your esteemed producer can go down there. It's been a while since I've been to a Waffle House. Just saying.
Ooh,
it has not changed. Just so you know.
I would hope not.
Is Special Lady still on the jukebox?
Back in the day, when I grew up in the Redneck Riviera, when hurricanes would come in, we would go to the Waffle House. That was the hurricane shelter. You just go there and eat waffles while everything just came apart. So.
Well, it's smart because then you're weighed down by the waffles, so you won't get blown away by the hurricane. All right, guys, you can say I'm Robbie while Scott takes us out as we do the outro. This is a tradition here on the DMZ show. And here we go. And we're off.
Bum 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 ba da bum 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 ba da 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 bum 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 ba bum bum ba da 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 bum. Ted's going to have to change that slide for his new book. Go to all these places. DMZ America, the podcast.